Good morning! This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on another miserable, muggy, another just horrible Florida morning. It doesn't really matter what day of the week it is. They're all the same this time of year. It just turned into August. August is no better than July. The humidity is beyond description. I mean, it's like living in a bowl of soup. It's just the worst anyone could possibly imagine. It's the equivalent of, Wisconsin's 30-degree below weather in January. You just don't want to go outside. You try to accomplish something that involves the outdoors and you give up right away because it's just not right. It just isn't. And people are, every year I hear, oh my God, it's hotter this year than last year. Oh, it's getting worse. Bullshit. I remember in 1978 in Naples was the same damn thing. The only difference was that I was younger and I had to escape my parents to get outside and be free, so I just put up with it, and everything didn't ache, and I wasn't really horribly fat, and I certainly wasn't on the whiskey that I am this morning, which I am. I've had plenty of the COVID, anti-Soviet, now the monkeypox whiskey, trying to keep myself safe from all of these horrible things going around, and I think I'm succeeding because I haven't been attacked by any Soviets, and for the moment I don't have monkeypox or COVID or any of that stuff that you hear about. So things are going pretty well on that front. Animal-wise, it's been very quiet. Peter is back today, apparently, from his Norwegian motorcycle trip. So I don't know if we're going to get new goats or not. Hopefully not. Honestly, I've been pretty happy without the goats molesting me in the morning, so with any luck, he'll just decide that that was a passing fancy and won't do it, and things will continue as they are. There are some new turtles. At the new house where I'm living, there are some tortoises, I think they are. Some kind of ancient Florida tortoise. It's protected, so you can't go near them, and they've burrowed pits in the backyard, and they come out from time to time, and they're weird and pissed off and just not happy when you're there, so maybe I'll try to get a picture of those, but you don't see them very often. You just know they're lingering somewhere. The RV progressing kind of slowly, which is a shame, but it is happening. Basically there's a couple of holdups. One is I'm trying to get the thing parked at the new house. I'm almost there, but not quite. And that's key to getting it in shape, where I can go out at 10 or 11 o'clock at night when the weather isn't ridiculous and do a few things to it that I need to do before I can go. I also need to get the tires on there and a couple of other things. Quick whiskey flask update, goat flask. I know I promised it would be mailed by Friday, and honestly that would have happened if I hadn't had a sort of malfunction with the labels that I ordered. Apparently, when I opened them up on Friday to use them, it turned out that I'd ordered labels that if you wanted to mail a matchbook, they would be the ones to use. So I kind of screwed that up. I had to reorder them. They're supposed to be in today, which means the flasks will go out tomorrow. But all the winners have been selected. There's 40 of them. They're all boxed up. They're ready to go. I just got to slap the labels on and bring them to the post office. So I promise you, this week those things are hitting the mail service, and you should have them soon if you're one of the lucky winners. And frankly, you are going to be lucky because I've been using that Curious Cars flask exclusively to drink my COVID whiskey in the morning. It's been terrific. It's just, I have that thing in my pocket. All you need is like a Swiss Army knife and a handkerchief and a 38, and you've basically got all the tools you need to get through the day. And that is the key to life. So anyway, I'm going to jump past all that, and we're going to jump, I should say realistically, 2 to 4 months on the RV. And in the meantime, I'm going to do some videos while I'm here. Unfortunately, some new cars have been heading my way, so I should be able to get a few more videos up. And here's one of them. This is a 1990 Cadillac Seville. I feel very lucky to have this car for a couple of reasons. Number one, not many are left. They're very hard to find in running and driving condition. This is one of the few that I've seen in the last few years. And number two, it's a nice addendum to that 88 Lincoln Continental we did the other day, because it sort of was a competitor to that. It came out at the same time, and as much as it pains me to say it, I think that Ford got it righter than, and that's not to say they got it right, because they didn't, but that Continental, that 88 Continental, it frankly got it righter than this Cadillac Seville did, and we'll get into that as we go. And again, I'm a GM guy, so don't think I'm just taking cheap shots here. The Seville would eventually become a sibling to the Eldorado, a sister car of the Coupe, kind of the same thing. But the name first appeared in Cadillac nomenclature in 1959, and it was sort of a higher-end option on the hardtop 59 Eldorado, which is one of the most iconic cars of all time, with the big tail fins, with the twin lights, just an absolutely amazing car. And the Seville was sort of a badge that would go on the higher end version of that. It would then take a break for 17 years and come back in 1976 on a car that would be a pretty big departure for Cadillac. And it wasn't actually the leading choice for a name, which we'll get into in a minute, but the 1976 Seville, it was an import fighter. And, Cadillac had realized that some of its buyers, at least its younger, hipper buyers, were drifting towards the higher-end imports like Mercedes and BMW. They couldn't help but notice, and they decided that they were going to try to do something about it. And, aiming to try became GM's logo for like the next 20 years after that. But oh God, they did aim to try. And in 76, they came out with the Seville. There was a lot of debate over the name. Seville was actually the third choice. In front of that was the LaSalle, which was a Cadillac lower-end sister brand, from historical times, and the Leland, which referred to Henry Leland, who was the founder of Cadillac, but of course was also the founder of Lincoln. So those two names were found to have a little bit too much baggage, and they ended up going with the Seville, which is, I think, the seat of government in Spain, and, definitely in line with Cadillac and GM's naming system at the time. For whatever reason, they when in doubt, they went running towards the Spanish language. But anyway, so that became the car. And it was a weird sort of departure for Cadillac at the time. I mean, it was much smaller than what was a traditional Cadillac then, and it was much tighter. And again, it was Cadillac's decision to try and lure some of the import buyers back by putting all of the Cadillac luxuries in a smaller, more compact, better handling, tighter package that ended up, and here's another thing that's weird, it was their priciest model other than the limousines, but it was based on the Chevy Nova, Chevy Camaro, Pontiac Firebird platform. It just seemed a little bit weird that this sort of lower-end platform became the basis for the Seville in 76 and, went on to be what it is. By the way, that's also the reason the 78 Trans Am ended up with disc brakes, was through the development of that Seville. And it actually sold very well. I think it's a very cool car. I'm going to wait until we actually have one of those to get into all the specifics about it for obvious reasons. But it's a car that I do like. And even if Cadillac did intend it to appeal to younger, hipper buyers, what it actually did was appeal to a bunch of rich old ladies who wanted a Cadillac that they could park. The younger, hipper buyers were not lured. They still, there were a few. I mean, there's no doubt the car was kind of cool and it got a few of them, but not enough, not even nearly enough to satisfy what Cadillac wanted. And it ended up being mostly just old ladies who, found it to be a nice sized, nice, dimension Cadillac that they could actually move into a parking space. So despite pretty good sales, Cadillac rethought the Seville for Generation 2 and made it this weird, oddly styled, larger car that seemingly came out of nowhere and frankly looked to me exactly like a garbage truck. I mean, I know it was supposed to hearken to like the British Daimlers at the time used to transport royalty and the House of Lords and that sort of thing, but at the end of the day it just looked to me a bit like a garbage truck. And it was based on the front-wheel drive Eldorado Riviera Toronado platform, and nobody really knew where it came from. but it did sell well. For whatever reason, people kind of liked it, and it did just fine. It would have sold a lot better if they didn't have some really crappy and terrible engine options, like the diesel, that 864 system, and some other stuff, which just didn't work out for them at all. Taking that, if they just put a regular, proper, Cadillac engine in the thing, a V8, it would have done better than it did. But then that leads us to this. This is the third generation Seville. Now it's basically forgotten. I mean, I don't remember before this car, the last time I saw one of these things organically running around. And, it's sort of, look, it's when Cadillac went too far. It's when they took downsizing to a point that they finally and ultimately just pissed off Cadillac buyers, the traditional buyer, and not just downsizing, but also cross-platforming and GM's, insipid badge engineering. I mean, they really just absolutely kind of blew it. And it just, right out of the gate, it sold like half as many as the last Cadillac Seville did. It just wasn't doing that well. That led to a very quick restyling in 1988 to sort of glam it up a little bit and make it more substantial, which was, it did what it did, and it helped sales a little bit, but not much. And they did then come out with an STS model, which frankly I would prefer to have for this video. But, again, where the hell do you find one? The last one of those I saw was at a collector car auction. It was the biggest piece of shit that I'd seen in a decade, so I just couldn't bring myself to buy it. But that STS model was interesting because it was yet another car that Cadillac desperately hoped would take it to the Europeans, which it just didn't. And even though it was kind of cool, it just didn't. On top of that, you had a Lexus coming in with the LS400, which was a car that actually schooled GM in how you would actually take it to the Europeans if you wanted to. Although that car was a bit more expensive. But you did have some lower priced luxury stuff now coming out from Honda and Datsun. You had your Infinities and your Acuras that hit right in the Cadillac sweet spot, lured the younger buyers away, and did really harm the chances that this car had. So all in all, it was just not a very elegant time for Cadillac. But these were the cars of my youth, and I love them accordingly. I can't help myself. I worked at the Buick Cadillac store in Naples at the time, so I drove a lot of these things when they were either new or, super low mileage used cars, and they meant something to me, and they still do today. And frankly, that's why I enjoy them and I celebrate them. It's certainly not because of how well they did in the market, which just wasn't that well at all. But look, whatever history may record, let me tell you, man, that 88 to 91 Seville STS was a pretty friggin' cool car. Even as a kid at the time, I remember those big square stainless pipes at the back, the logo. It was neat. And even if the market didn't, take it and do what it should have done with it or could have done with it, I still thought it was a pretty cool car at the time. And the collector market, a bit to my surprise, seems to be agreeing. I mean, there's been sort of an odd and significant spike in prices on these late 80s, early 90s front-wheel drive caddies, something I would never have predicted. And honestly, it's just probably because there aren't that many left for anyone who wants to collect one. It's just rare to find one of these things running around. Usually I would put the events of 1990 in here before we jumped into this specific car, but I just did that 944 Cabriolet a couple weeks ago, and we covered 1990 in that, so I'll just put a link to that below. We'll consider that done and wait till we find another car with a year that I haven't attacked yet. So I tell you what, I'm going to take a break for a minute, and then we're going to leap and dive directly into this specific car, so bear with me one moment. Go on. Go on, Rouse. Rouse. All right, so look, let's just jump right into this specific car and see what we got. Number one, look, the styling really isn't terrible. I mean, It uses some of the same cues that the W124 Mercedes did at the time, the 300E, which was, of course, the big one. And that being sort of a traditional grille, traditional Mercedes styling cues, mixed into a new aerodynamic package that was quite handsome. Unfortunately for Cadillac, who did the same thing, they used this traditional grille. They had the wreaths and crests and the hood ornament, even bumperettes on that rather sort of modern-looking styled bumper. The overall package just wasn't that attractive in the way that the 124 was, but not particularly memorable either. I mean, the critiques that it looked way too... I mean, man, look at this thing from the side. I mean, it could be a Grand Am, I mean... The effort that GM made to sell mid-size Buicks and Oldsmobiles by making them look like Cadillacs, they worked pretty well for those brands in the early 1980s, but they worked hard against Cadillac when this car came along. I mean, making all these sort of cheaper cars Cadillac-esque, it cheapened the brand, or at least it was the continuation of what cheapened the brand, something that happened a couple of decades earlier, which we covered in, earlier Cadillac videos. So those marks did great in the early 80s, but basically the badge engineering and cross-platforming were now coming home to roost in a really big way, and right when GM was facing incredibly tough, strong new global competition and just couldn't afford to whiff at the ball, and they did. And of course that led to many years of GM trouble before they got their shit together, which they eventually did, but they were really flailing at this time. But this car is interesting. So look, you've got this formal roofline, which, again, is nice and, what Cadillac buyers might have wanted. But it was a full-size car that, I mean, even in Europe, this thing would be a bit sketchy as a full-size car. It would certainly be a mid-sized. It could almost be called a compact. I mean, it was feet shorter than the traditional Cadillac. And the guys that they wanted to buy it, they felt that this thing was just a bridge too far. It was too much. But it did have some interesting bits. So you've got these composite bumpers, which of course was a thing at the time. They did add bumperettes to it, which again harkened to earlier Cadillacs. But you've got modern European-looking headlights, composite headlights. You've got a rather attractive air dam at the bottom, which looks more like the STS, a car I'll get into in a second. You've got alloy wheels, which were modern at the time, and I think honestly these are particularly good looking ones. I wouldn't take that away from Cadillac. You've got a big chrome strip that runs the whole distance of the car with cladding on the bottom, Mercedes style, which, again, taken as it is, it looks pretty good. Traditional looking chrome door handles, which conflict with the aero theme. There's that straight up roofline, which, yeah, take it as you will. The trunk is a bit elevated. It's got some nice creases in it. Comes down into a set of rather thin-looking taillights, going back into a composite bumper with more built-in bumperettes. No more gas tank behind the license plate. That's now on the left side of the car. And you've got, like on that Continental, the doors go up and into the roof, European style, which does help with aerodynamics and sound inside, sound deadening. So, it could have been there. Oh, you also do have those fender light indicators, which, again, we're meant to appeal to the traditional Cadillac guy, but don't work so much with this one. To me, these non-STS Sevilles just didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, what really differentiated this car from a front-wheel drive sedan DeVille? What was the difference? I mean, how did the buyer choose between the two? I mean, essentially, or for that matter, a Park Avenue, which, Cadillac did have the V8 in these cars, which differentiated it, but the V6s and the Buicks basically put out the same horsepower, the same acceleration times, the same performance, and they did it for $6,000 or more or less. So Buick actually sold well during these years by being more of a Cadillac than a Cadillac was. I mean, in their own way. They were known for quality at a time when Cadillac wasn't. They had plenty of luxury, and frankly, the cars were ornate enough to pass for Cadillac. So I just don't see the point. I mean, they were all competing for the same dwindling buyer pool of old guys who like nugget jewelry and riverboat gambling. Meanwhile, the young hipsters were off driving Acura Legends with manual transmissions, or buying LS400s or Mercedes or BMWs. They were just bleeding customers, Cadillac, at the time, and relying entirely on their ever dying pool of really old people who just wouldn't drive anything but a Cadillac. If they'd made them all STSs, which it was a really kind of a neat car. I mean, it was monochrome. It had beefed up suspension. It had kind of a beefed up appearance overall. It had really cool exhaust ports at the back, and it looked like it. In fact, it handled very well. The suspension was tougher and beefier than these cars, and it had big sway bars and alloys. And if they had made them all STSs, it would have been much truer to the Seville's original intent as an import fighter, and it would have given the Seville an actual identity beyond something that really, are you driving a sedan DeVille or are you driving a Seville? I mean, they just, somebody couldn't really tell at first look. And, of course, Lincoln capitalized heavily on that. Their ads all surrounded around, there was that famous ad of the valet drivers. They couldn't figure out which GM car somebody was driving, but a guy who put in a ticket for a Lincoln got his car right away because it looked different, and there was some truth to that. And that's of course why Lincoln took a lot of Cadillac buyers at the time. And I just think Cadillac really, well, they were flailing. They were overwhelmed and they were flailing, or at least that's how they appeared. And I think, frankly, it's because that's what they were doing. And for me, there was just absolutely no reason to have the Seville look so much and compete with the sedan DeVille or the Park Avenue or the Oldsmobiles at the time. They just were all too alike. So anyway, let's dive into this thing. We'll start inside the trunk. So you do have your traditional wreath and crest thing with the flip-up emblem to hide the keyhole. Put that in. There's also an interior release, but we're not there yet. And you have a nice sized trunk. So, this was meant to be a full-sized car. It did have to have a pretty big trunk, and it did. Your infants, your toddlers, even your, very, very young adults are going to fit in that trunk with no issue. You can throw them back there, close the trunk down, and they'll have plenty of room, plenty of comfort, and, maybe the ventilation's going to be kind of shitty, but it's good enough. You also have a trunk mat in here with more wreaths and crests. Underneath that, get into it, is your spare tire. You've got, they moved the gas tank to give you a little bit more trunk space and not have a big spare tire hanging there, and that worked fine. You also have a nice little Cadillac suck down, which, you better at this point in time, and that works fine. So have a look under the hood. Oh, God, where the hell is the hood release? There it is. All right, let's see what we got here. I do like the hood ornament. I'll never not like that. The wreaths and crests with all the ducks. I know they're not ducks, but they're ducks to me. And they harken to that Antoine de la Mothe sur la Caton, whatever the hell is. The guy who founded Detroit, and he was a real confidence man and womanizer, and, I think a pretty cool guy to name a car company after. But anyway, here it is. So this is a 4.5 V8, and this was one of the ways that Cadillac was trying to make itself differentiated from the rest, because the Buicks and the Oldsmobiles at the time did not have the V8, certainly not in the front drive platform. But when this Seville came out in '86, they really didn't have much that was ready. So they took that HT4100, the 4-liter, 4.1 liter with the aluminum block and the iron heads, not particularly beloved. They turned it sideways and ran it into a Turbohydra 4-speed transaxle. And that thing had no horsepower, 0 to 60 in like 12 and a half. But, you know, it was a V8, and, you know, Cadillac buyers sort of demanded V8s. In 88, they came out with the 4.5, which bumped up the horsepower, but it had a throttle body, so it didn't bump it up a lot. And then in 1990, despite an all-new Seville coming in a couple of years, they bumped it up to the 4.5 with multi-port fuel injection, which brought it up to like 180, which this car has, somewhere around there. And then in 91, again, the last year, no reason to really go nuts and change engines around. They did put the 4.9 liter in it, which was another extension of this motor that bumped it up to 200 horsepower and made it a little more palatable to people who still wanted beef under the hood. You know, that said, the Lexus LS 400 had like 270 at the time, and was frankly much more appealing to people who could stroke a check for this kind of car. That said, the suspension on the car is all independent, trailing arms and coil springs and rear self-levelers. It had four-wheel discs. It had a very competent, very proper suspension and mechanicals, bulletproof automatic, as GM's did, nice low torque in the V8, traditional Cadillac style. But despite the underneath, the wrapper outside just wasn't enough to get people excited about the car. That said, I think the 4.5 and the 4.9 are probably the best engines from this era. Later on, the 92 Seville would get the North Star, which, you know, the first gen, great motor at the time, but a hard one to keep going today. And as a result, these last generation of the prior motor, probably a little bit more reliable, probably more desirable. At least I've always felt that way in the Allante. Later on, they evolved the North Star, and it became a pretty great engine. But anyway, a pretty low mileage car, just under 60,000 on this thing. Everything looking kind of nice, proper, and original under the hood. And I think one of the most significant features of this particular car is that it exists, because a lot of them just absolutely are gone. I mean, this was not a car that people thought about saving or collecting or keeping until only very, very recently. And again, you know, the STS was beefier, it was cooler. The rack and pinion that it had a little bit more sportiness to it. If all of these Sevilles had been that, it just would have been a more interesting piece. So, all right, look, let me put that down. I'm going to get my crap inside the trunk, and then we're going to have a look at the inside and go for a spin. So, hold on one moment. All right, so we'll have a look inside this thing. Again, you can see the state of Peter's yard, beyond awful. But as I understand, he's coming back today, so I do suspect the next video we do, he'll have whipped his kid into shape, and we'll see a more polished yard, but time will tell. Anyway, let's have a look in the back and see what we got. So here's where you're going to stuff your Canadians. You know, bearing in mind that this is a full-sized car, and yet it really isn't. Cadillac had to pull a few tricks to make it appear so. And the way they did that was they shortened the seat, so it's not quite as long as you would think. And what that does is give you a little bit of legroom that you otherwise might not have. Now, you know, why Cadillac engineers at the time then put these ridiculous overblown rear seat map pockets in, which, you know, actually infringe on your comfort zone, I have no idea. It seems a bit self-defeating. But either way, there it is. You've got very nice leather. They did manage to do that at the time. The button tufting in there does look kind of neat, and is traditional Cadillac. You've got wreaths and crests etched into the seat back. But again, look how short that rear package shelf is. I mean, this is just not a big car. And of course, that sort of add-on center eye third brake light that was common in cars at the time. The door panels, sort of a mixture of Euro and American. You've got Seville stitched in here. You've got, I don't know, you got your door light. The quality is just not there in a way that it was in the Mercedes or, the Lexus, the Acuras. They did a better job at this time than GM did, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And you can tell that based on, the way the trim is sort of degrading on here in a way that it shouldn't for a car with only 59,000 miles. That's just kind of a shame. But anyway, you've got got ashtrays in the back because people did, of course, smoke in the 1980s still, 1990, whatever, same kind of thing. Your window switches and, you know, everything looking as it should. From this angle, look how thin the backrests on those front seats are. And, you know, it's not just a styling cue. Part of that was, again, to create the image of more space inside the car than it really had. And people weren't fooled. I guess if you're retired New Jersey firefighters who bought these things, who were clinging to Cadillacs of the past, you know, they might have pretended to be happy with that. But any self-honest Cadillac buyer at the time just said, this thing's too small. Door panels up front, same thing. All the molded plastic, the stitched-in Seville stuff. You've got a little grab handle. You got your power windows, your 8-way or 12-way power seats, your door locks, that kind of thing. You've got lumbar and recliner on the seat itself. I do, again, like the leather in these cars. I think it's nice. They got that right. But all in all, yeah, you know, I can just see why these things didn't do great. All right, let's fire it up and see what we got. That's all very traditional. All right, and there's that vacuum fluorescent display, which, and we get a little bit of air conditioning going here. Let's see, monitored systems are okay. That's comforting. Let's close the door. Get a seatbelt on. Turn that fan down a little bit. Put it on low. All right, so here is a sort of a high-end vacuum fluorescent display, which, get it off of auto. There we go, there's low. Which actually came from GM's collaboration with Hughes at the time. They were responsible for the digital readouts and such, and it's a nice readout. The car magazines didn't love it at the time, but I think it's what consumers liked, and that was fine. You can see it has a big, of course, speedometer in the middle. You've got a, digital readout for the amount of fuel you have left. Here you see just 59,000 miles on the clock, and your PRND indicator there on the right. And not a very extensive display, but good enough to look modern. Over here you've got your Twilight Sentinel. That's a hearkening to Cadillac buyers of the past. Your interior dimming, your light controls. Over here you've got your wiper controls. All that works well and it looks kind of neat. Your mirrors in a very non-ergonomic place, so get those sorted before you start driving. You've got Cadillac Symphony sound stereo and cassette with a EQ. And again, I don't know what it is about EQs that turn your passengers into sound engineers. They always feel like they have to start screwing with the levels, and they don't care if you've taken like months to get them set where you want. They're going to do it anyway, and just back off, man. Stop touching that crap. And of course we got commercials. Give me 3 steps. All right. Anyway, there it is. You got a sound system there. I wish it had more vents. I mean, you've got one vent here on the left for the driver and this other one down here. I wish it needs like one more somewhere. But again, they didn't have that much space to work with. And even if the dash is kind of nice and tight and sort of well put together, it does not look unlike other GM products at the time, which was something that people weren't happy with. Being a 90, you do have a driver's side airbag in this that helped them not put those stupid rolling seatbelt things in. And of course, it's a premium car, so it should have an airbag. It does have tilt wheel, which is nice. You've got your cruise control over there. Stock looks good, works fine. Over here, you've got sort of an automatic climate control system with more of that vacuum fluorescent. Beneath that, what was considered super high technology at the time, this information display and trip computer and information center that gave you things like your range and your temperature, your time, your average economy, which it wasn't bad. It's saying 10 on this thing, but I think it got over 20 in the city, this car, if I remember right. It was like 22, 28. This is probably just because it idles a lot. This car hasn't been moved much. You got a tachometer here if you use it. You've got your whatever, all this crap. We'll leave it on range. Here you have an ashtray again for your riverboat gambler types, all nice. You got a floor shift, no 6-passenger seat seating in the Sevilles. They did use real American walnut trim, which was nice in this car, and frankly something Cadillac hadn't done for decades. They'd been using the fake shit for a long time, so at least they had that going. This is weird. So you've got this little roller thing here. You leave it like this, it sort of blends in. You go 1, you've got your coin holder for your tolls and such, and you go 2, and you've got, this way, you've got a cup holder for, you know, I don't even know what kind of cup you're going to fit in that thing or how it's even going to stay once you put it in there, but that's what Cadillac gave you, so I'm going to put it back to that. And here you've got a center console, terrible gun storage, but you know, you could put something small in there. And then beneath that, this little thing, which is all very complex and, you know, does still seem to be working, but is kind of odd, but also does look kind of neat. Over here, you've got a glove box. You put that up, you've got your little fuse area, your trunk release fuel door, and of course a set of books and a little bit of bunched leathery looking stuff beneath it, which should wow your front seat occupants. Up top, you've got your cocaine mirrors. Dalton, the detailer, was here. Wonderful. He's now leaving notes in the car. I have to admit, his handwriting's way better than I would have ever suspected possible, so he's got that going for him. Here you've got the Cadillac's traditional little place to store narcotics where you hope a state trooper won't find them. You got pull-out vent visor things that keep the sun out, and, you know, all in all, you're going to be pretty happy, so. All right, let's go for a spin. You know, the vista of the car isn't bad. I do like that the wreath and crest hood ornament sort of leads the way. I think that looks good. You can see your lamp indicators there on the left, again, to make the retired New Jersey firefighter feel like he's still in a Cadillac. And the tilt wheel, yeah, works pretty good. So it is a fairly comfortable car to sit in. You can arrange the seat in a bazillion different ways. You can find comfort, no problem. And even the lumbar, let's see, make sure it is. Nah, I'm not getting anything out of the lumbar, so there it is. But anyway, you could have had it, and you have a pretty comfy seating position. Now, having the 4.5 V8 is a big plus, especially going to the multi-port version. And I remember when these things came out, I was working at that Cadillac store, and we were all stunned. And there you see it. That's like half throttle of the pep that that engine had. I mean, it was a real, but you have to remember, put it in context of the time. These cars all had, you know, like 150 horsepower. You'd get it in 85 Cadillac and the thing couldn't get out of its own way. So we were all very impressed that the thing had some induction noise and actually enough torque to, you know, even, oh, look at this. Oh my, it's suicidal deers running across the road. Great. I don't know why. I imagine the people on the street must not like venison. If this was my street, yeah, there wouldn't be a deer left on it. I have to get on Peter about that. I think he's got a Mauser in the closet. Anyway, it had a lot of pep at the time, and I could put that in context from working there. You know, we all took one of these things for a spin. There's a bird that's suicidal. One of these things for a spin when they came out. We laid a patch of rubber down in the back lot and thought, wow, you know, this is way too much power for an 80-year-old guy. He's going to kill somebody. And, you know, sure enough, you did run into that. I mean, there were these instances in Naples, at least, of, you know, old guys smearing workers up against the wall in the local drive-through car wash. But I tell you, it does have a nice peppy sound to that V8, and that is the one, to me, a little bit of a oh god, you see the flashing thing? That's just the what do you call it, the flicker rate, the refresh rate of the thing. So when I pull back, it's going to flicker, but anyway, the display is nice and clear. Don't hold that against the car. But anyway, it was the one saving grace of this car, is it had some pep. And that, you know, probably was enough for some people, but not enough to make the sales what they should have been. It drives smooth enough. Like I said, the mechanicals on the car were not bad. The suspension, very, very competent, the steering, rack and pinion, nice and precise, but it does not feel like a big car. It does not feel like a traditional Cadillac, and that, I think, is a big part of what turned off the buyers, so that's kind of a shame. Again, if they'd all been STSs, which basically had the same drivetrain, but just a more beefed up suspension, it would have made more sense. You would have said, okay, here's it maybe it isn't up to snuff, but at least it knows what it is, and it's fighting, the Euro buyers. But we could just as easily be in a sedan DeVille, 1990, 4.5 V8, same alloy wheels, same interior appointments. What the hell is the difference? What the hell is the difference? So, again, this is just a time when Cadillac didn't have its shit together, was flailing to figure out what to do, and it would take them quite a few more years before they did. This one's going to be for sale at Auto House. If you have an interest, you can give them a call at 239-263-8500, or check them out on the web at autohousenaples.com. Got more stuff coming up. Really appreciate you guys having a look. Promise the next video I'm going to confirm that the goat flasks are on the way, and otherwise I just can't thank everybody enough who watches, listens, subscribes, tells their friends to watch. That's a risk to friendship if there's ever been one, and otherwise suffers through these long, miserable 40-minute videos about old 90s cars everybody forgot. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we will see you with the next one. Take care.